Welcome back to the show. This is Phil Vischer Podcast. I am Phil Vischer. I am here with Christian Taylor.
Hey, Phil.
Hi, Christian. How are you?
I'm good.
That's calico?
What? This is my dress from Italy. It's actually
what is it?
Linen.
It's
blue linen.
Okay. And Sky Chitani.
Hi, Phil.
Hi.
This is Black
Man
from
Black.
Mauritius.
What?
This shirt was manufactured in Mauritius.
Oh, that's a country.
Which rhymes with delicious.
Where is that?
It's in the Indian Ocean. It's a small island populated by a lot of my former countrymen.
Is that really where that's from?
Yes.
That's fantastic.
You can look on the tag.
That's fantastic.
Wow.
Amy, would you check the tag?
I can't.
No, I didn't buy it there. I'm just saying it was made there.
Oh.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just want to say
And this is from Target. Target. You can check the tag. It doesn't say Target. It says, what's that?
Morimoso?
I was thinking
Morimoto,
Morimoto, but that's my daughter's married name.
No, it's Morissimo or...
Morona.
Okay, now I have to look.
Oh, Massimo.
Massimo.
Yeah. Massimo.
And we have a special guest. Amy Black is here. We'll introduce her shortly. Hi, Amy.
Hi.
We'll tell everyone who you are. She's been here before. But
I
it's
won't
been
see
like...
where your thing is made from, I promise.
Thank you.
It's been like 3 years. So anyway... we're going to start. I'm just going to sing
Theme thong?
I'm going to sing the theme song. Hey, it's a podcast. I should listen to what key I'm in first. Hey, it's a podcast. What do you know? Hey, it's a podcast. And we got video. Hey, it's a podcast. So lend an ear. The Phil Vischer Podcast starts right here. Oh, we'll talk to Sky.
Hi.
And Christian, too.
Hello.
And we've got a guest, Amy Black's here for you.
Hello.
Hey, it's a podcast. So lend an ear. The Phil Vischer Podcast starts right here. The Phil Vischer Podcast starts right here.
Sky hates the theme song.
No, he just hates the ukulele.
Oh, yeah.
They go hand in hand.
They do.
I could play the theme song on bongos. I could try that sometime.
Be my guest.
Prefer that?
Yes, I probably would.
I have a melodica over there.
Can't you do it like Bobby McFarlane or whatever his name was? McFerrin. And,
Use your mouth?
And just
Seth MacFarlane and Bobby McFerrin.
something like that. And just
Different
use
people.
like your percussion
Use
from your body and head.
I think we should stick with the ukulele.
I'll use percussion from your body and head, pal. We are now, the Phil Vischer Podcast is now up on Stitcher. So if you don't use iTunes, you don't like to use iTunes, you can use Stitcher, and that also works. We're there. We've been trying to get up there for a while. Also, we have just passed 300 supporters on Patreon. Yes, the Phil Vischer Podcast is supported by viewers and listeners like you. We're past 300 supporters on Patreon. We're more than halfway to our first goal. We're almost past 300 supporters. Oh, we're really close. Sorry.
It might be you.
We are so close to passing 300 supporters that if several hundred of you will sign up, we will pass it. Oh, four of you will sign up, we will pass 300 supporters.
And if you sign up, you can get access to the movie review podcast, the movie proposal. We just reviewed what I think is the worst Jesus movie I have ever seen. So it's a fun rant on my part.
Oh,
What
good.
movie is that?
Oh, and he's not going to tell you. It's a secret.
You got to be
title.
subscribed.
No, it's not going to secret. It's a secret. You gotta go check it out. You got to go check it out.
I better not have to go check it out.
And well, little sense of
Hopefully
entitlement
you'll share
here.
it with me.
Just because you're a regular, you want special treatment?
I do.
Okay.
I don't get paid, so.
You get paid in tiny little candies and an occasional Diet Dr. Pepper. And also this week we did a live stream Q&A with Sky and I for an hour on Tuesday for Patreon subscribers if you subscribe past the $10 level. Yes. And that was a whole lot of fun. We had a bunch of people turn out and we answered lots of questions. Late
And you got some
to
cookies.
the night. And we got some cookies. One of our listeners or viewers or whatever on that live stream baked cookies.
Asked us for our favorite cookie order.
And then somehow got them to our guest. Yes, asked us for our favorite cookies and then baked them and then got them to Amy, and she smuggled them in through security, and now they're here.
Hand delivered.
That's amazing.
We're going to make her test them to make sure there's nothing, in them that might affect how we perform on the podcast today. Because you never know. You can't be too safe.
Well, you're not allowed to bring baked goods like that into the schools anymore.
Really?
Yeah,
That's
you can
true.
only have store-bought food. It has to be highly
Really?
processed with lots of chemicals in order to be
What about
edible
And
by your children.
hermetically
for
sealed.
like a cakewalk?
No.
There is
bake-
no cakewalk.
You
no
cannot
bake
do that
sales.
anymore.
No bake sales?
I mean,
What
you
about
got
a bake
to.
sale?
This gets to the broader issue of our culture.
How
where
does our educational system work without bake sales?
We no longer know our neighbors, so we cannot trust what they bake. So we
Yeah.
can't have that into our homes.
It hasn't been that long since my kids were in middle school and grade school, and we had
Do you know
Longer
what your
than you
children
think.
ate?
brownies and cookies.
If you're in
and-
Colorado, you don't want your kids eating brownies.
Oh, I'm not in Colorado.
Yeah, but it's
So they
they're
ruined it
opening
for-
the
they
first
ruined it
marijuana
for all of us?
They're opening the first medical marijuana dispensary in Oak Park this week.
That's fun to know.
Yeah.
First medical marijuana dispensary.
Yeah, it's called 7 Point. Don't ask me why I know so much about this.
Why do you know so much about this? Okay, so last week we had Glenn Powell, right?
Yes.
Right.
That was his name.
Pow, wham! Yeah, it's
we
like
had Glenn-
Batman.
Batman.
We had Glenn Powell on the show, and we talked about the Bible and how we've mucked it up to try to sell more copies and add
Or
more
marked
stuff.
it up.
Marked it up and mucked it up. And that got a lot of really good response. And one of our viewers pointed out that the Babylon Bee had just run a story that fit in rather perfectly with what we talked about. I don't know if you read this. The Babylon Bee is a satirical Christian news site. Go to babylonbee.com, maybe. I don't know. Just Google Babylon Bee. Anyway, this just in from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Zondervan has announced Thursday an exciting new wide-margin journaling edition of its popular NIV Bible translation, which eliminates the biblical text altogether to provide readers with more space to write their own thoughts, ideas, and feelings as they study God's Word. Says a Zondervan representative, our surveys and market observations have consistently indicated that readers want more and more space for their own thoughts and doodles and such, and we can only make the book so large. The obvious solution was to continue to thin out the biblical text, leading us to this inevitable conclusion, removing it entirely. It's a
That's funny.
journaling study Bible with no Bible in it. Okay.
What they should do is actually make a version
I
that
thought
only
it was
includes the
funny.
verses that people regularly want to read.
That just has those?
Yeah, and then they can journal
Yeah.
all around them.
They can provide the context.
Exactly.
You know what? They kind of have that already.
I think it's
They're
called the Precious Moments calendar.
No, they're called spiritual coloring books.
Oh, yeah.
That
we do
is
have
that is
spiritual.
exactly what they do. They take
Yeah.
verses that everyone wants to hear,
Yeah.
and they make them into coloring books.
We should do a
the
Mad
good
Libs
stuff.
version of the Bible.
Where
Where there's words missing and people can fill in what they think should go there.
Yeah.
Because that's really what
That's
most
kind of what we do anyway.
people do anyway. But
Yeah.
it'd be entertaining.
Yeah, we should do that.
Yeah.
And sell it.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have any interns who could work on that?
Mad Libs version of famous Bible passages.
Oh, it's not the whole Bible? It's not a
Well-
Mad Libs Bible?
I mean, it could be. But let's start.
Start small.
Yeah, start small.
Okay. Second story. So in this age of live streaming, we have street evangelists that live stream everything they do.
I'm sure they have a wide audience.
So yes, a man named Nick Grimsman was live streaming in Scottsdale, Arizona. He's a street evangelist. He's traveling around the country live streaming, and he was live streaming on the street. Apparently said something that God didn't approve of because he was almost struck by lightning.
Wow.
You can actually watch the live
Wow.
stream. He was, wow, this is getting kind of stormy out here. I should probably head for cover. And suddenly the screen goes completely white.
Where was the camera? Was
in his hand.
Oh,
He's
in his
holding
hand.
it in his
It was
hand.
like a selfie stick or
yes,
something.
it was a selfie.
You probably shouldn't be holding a selfie stick in a thunderstorm. Just.
But
you
he
know.
was preaching God's word, so what could possibly go wrong? So what does it mean when you're street witnessing and you're nearly struck by lightning? It was close enough that it knocked him down and he dropped the phone. So he had to stop.
So is he back on the
He's okay.
saddle?
He's okay. He was not killed, but he was stopped.
Well,
If you were an atheist, what would you do with that?
I would say God wanted him to stop talking.
You can't say that if you're an atheist.
Oh, well, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Because that would really, that's almost a proof for God. If you're an atheist, then you have to just say, oh, it's random.
Yeah,
just
it's random.
But you don't want it to be random.
Actually, what I would say is, you know what? You probably shouldn't be standing up on a platform holding a selfie stick in a thunderstorm.
He's street witnessing. It was not
Well,
on a platform.
they're always standing on something.
Is that a metaphorical platform?
Yeah, soapbox.
Yeah, okay.
Did you hear about Tony Perkins? It's
Did
kind
he
of
start
related.
the Perkins restaurants?
No, he's
No,
the
he's
Family
the-
Research Council
Yes,
guy.
I know
So
who he
he's one of these characters who, when there are natural disasters, will sometimes be one of those voices who says, well, this is God's judgment for this or
Yes.
that, or Haiti that, or whatever. Well, apparently his house was wiped out in this flooding that occurred in Louisiana, which is,
No, Sky was just about to laugh at that.
No, I'm not laughing at it.
Oh, okay.
But he's come out and talked about how devastating this has been for him and his family, as it has been for thousands of other people.
Over 60,000
Yeah,
homes.
it's really, really bad.
Yeah.
And so somebody brought up the point, well, why doesn't he think this is divine judgment? Because it's
Exactly.
happened to him this time. And so does lightning striking a street evangelist challenge our theology or his theology? It's only when it's someone you don't like who gets wiped out by a natural disaster that you say it's God's judgment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I like some street evangelists, I think. Maybe.
Well, maybe we should look at his videos. See,
Did your college require you to do street evangelism for credit?
I went to a state university.
Yeah, I know, but that doesn't answer the question. Come on.
There were street evangelists, though. we Brother Jeb came through every year.
Our unpaid, now paid, but unnamed intern says yes, his school required him to do street witnessing for credit, as did mine.
I went to the Catholic University of America, and I was never required to do that.
What did they require? What do you?
Actually,
is there Christian service at your university?
It wasn't required, but we were
Okay.
required to take world religion classes.
Okay.
So
Well, we were hauled down to Hennepin Avenue in downtown Minneapolis in a bus and turned out near the bars
wow.
at night. I'm a freshman in college who's very introverted, and I didn't like it.
Did you get a grade on this?
If you did it, yes. If you showed up, that was all.
So they didn't stand there watching as to whether or
No,
not you talked
no.
to people.
Was there like
Phew,
a
lucky
conversion
for you.
rate that determined your grade?
No, I don't think anyone was converted. Although we were converted to fear street evangelism.
I saw atheist evangelists in California a couple years ago.
Really?
How did that
Yeah.
work?
Oh, it was really interesting. I don't know if we want to get into that in this
Okay,
podcast.
no,
but
that's
it's a
not
great
what this
story
is about.
sometime.
I do want to hear that story.
It's not what this is about. I'm recording in a different way, and I actually have to flip over to a different screen to see how much time has gone by, so I know that we need to start. Yes, it's time to turn to our guest. Who is our guest?
My
Sky?
name is Amy Black.
Christian? Who's our guest? That's Dr. Amy Black to you, right?
It is.
Amy Black are you currently the chair?
No.
Or you're not the chair. You were the chair for a while.
I was.
You had
but
to be.
That has been that
You
that has
got
been
out of it.
That I've gotten out of it 4 years ago now.
Oh, congratulations.
Yes. Passed the baton multiple times.
The former chair of the political science department at Wheaton College. Amy is the author of Honoring God in Red or Blue, Approaching Politics with Humility, Grace, and Reason from Moody Publishers, and has a new book. You want to hold that one up?
I'm holding it up.
Okay. The new book is 5 Views on the Church and Politics from Zondervan, an edited volume that introduces the political thought of 5 theological traditions, Anabaptist, Lutheran, the Black Church, Reformed, and Catholic, and places them in conversation with one another.
And
That sounds like the
That's
beginning of a joke.
Yeah, it does. It
doesn't
sounds like the priest and the
So,
rabbi.
I
and
told
the,
Amy before we started, I am really excited about reading this book because there's good
Yeah.
authors. You're one of the editors, the general editor, I should say.
Right.
Was it your idea?
It was my idea, and I got all the people together, and I edited all their pieces, and then someone at Zondervan just automatically gets his name on the book.
Right.
Uh-huh.
So you did all the work.
I did.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is the whole
But I
series of
didn't.
counterpoints are good.
It's a series of counterpoints, yeah, and most of them are a lot of them are about like different doctrines of the church, but this is trying to help us understand different historical traditions and how these different traditions have thought about the role of church and state, the role of individual believers in politics. And what I like about it is we can learn from these different traditions, and it's not as if they have to all be one of us is right and one of us is wrong,
Right.
but they can be in conversation with one another
Right.
and learning from one
Which is
another.
a little bit what we talked about last week with Glenn Powell about how we read the Bible. We need to read it among people from different traditions so that we can see
Right.
our own blind spots.
Sure.
So our political engagement and view of the public square from different Christian traditions, I'm really looking forward to reading that.
That sounds really good. Was there anything in there that was really surprising to you, or did you know it all already?
I'm not sure if I knew it all already, but
knowledge.
But I do teach this already at the
Yeah.
college. So in our senior seminar for all of our political science and international relations majors, we look at all these traditions. What I did that did kind of add something different that I learned a lot from I added in the tradition of the Black Church because we don't talk a lot about African American spirituality and the role of the Black Church in the United States.
Which has been huge.
It's huge, and it's so important in politics. I don't think you can understand American politics without at least thinking about the role of the Black Church. So we were able to put sort of historical traditions that predate the United States, but put them in conversation with the Black Church.
And that's written by Dr. Bruce Fields, who was a professor of mine at Trinity. That I
No
really,
way.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed him.
Wow. Okay. Is there a 2-sentence summary of those positions? I mean, what is the difference between an Anabaptist and a Catholic in terms of political engagement?
Well, actually, you picked two good ones because they're kind of opposite of one another.
I just had that sense that
You
they
just
were.
knew. So the Anabaptists would be the most strong advocates of separation in church and state. And the idea here is not that separation of church and state to protect, not the state, to protect the church.
Yeah.
That the church itself, to maintain her purity, that it's important that believers stay distanced from the state. And for some in the Anabaptist tradition, not all, they'll go so far as to not vote, not participate in politics at all, because that's how they protect their purity. And so they're there as a Christian witness. And the way that they witness to society is by staying away from sort of the power of society.
And is the thought that they will then inspire people towards the good and the true?
Yes, and
then,
that they're an alternative community. And so you see the vision of what Christian believers look like living in community, and that will look different. The other piece there is that sense of where does the power of the state come from? And Anabaptists are pacifists, and so this idea of nonviolence, if there's violence at the core of a state, your laws are, what happens if you break the law? You can be imprisoned, your life can be taken. And so some Anabaptists will say we cannot participate in a state that is undergirded by violence. So that would be, again, and that's another thing, within these traditions, there's lots of difference.
Right,
and so each of my authors is from his tradition.
Okay.
It says, I'm not speaking for everyone, I'm speaking for myself.
Right. And what's, for the listeners at home, remind us, what's the difference between an Anabaptist and a Baptist?
Well, that's complicated, and it depends on who you ask. How's that? But they actually are, according to most historians, different traditions, but there's a debate. But both of them have this sense of Anabaptism after baptism. Both traditions emphasize the need for an individual believer to profess faith on his or her own and then be baptized. So that's something that they share. But the Anabaptist tradition, it comes out of reformers, radical reformers is what they were called, in the Netherlands and other places, who were rebaptizing people who had already been baptized in the Catholic Church. And so many were killed and they were persecuted for this rebaptism. So this goes way back.
Because Baptists also in the U.S., have a strong tradition of separation of church and state as
exactly.
well.
Roger Williams and whatnot.
And most sort of our modern American Baptists, we would typically date more to some breakoff movements in England that come a little bit later. But again, that idea of separation of church and state, it's not something we actually hear, I think, as much about right now, particularly in evangelical circles. It's sort of this assumption that we're all going to be involved in the state.
Right.
But to recognize that there are robust traditions, robust, important Christian traditions that advocate separation is important.
And you see the Anabaptist view most reflected in Quakers and Mennonites nowadays?
Right, Mennonites, and then the churches of the Brethren.
Okay.
So those would be your and you mentioned so that you have kind of Anabaptists. If you went on one end, it's a little hard because it's not exactly like we can lay them out in a perfect spectrum.
Right.
But the least engaged with culture would probably be the Anabaptists. And then the Catholics would be sort of the opposite in the sense of the most engagement with culture. It's not that Catholics are going to say that everything about the church is good and that we should just be all in, but that there's much more room and space within Catholic theology to be working alongside the state, working with the state, but also leaving a little bit of room to confront the state when necessary.
Right. And what's the origin of the Catholic viewpoint? Is it post-Reformation, or does it really go all the way back to...
That's a problem. That's one of the things that we had to think about in the book. And anytime you write about Catholic theology, do you go back all the way back to St. Peter?
Right.
Or do you pick something more modern? And then to some extent you can go to Augustine. Some go to Aquinas. My author looked at both Augustine and Aquinas kind of for some of the principles, but a lot of what he was talking about would probably be post-Vatican II. So there's just, when you have a 2,000-year history, you just can't cover it all in, 10,000 words, I think it is.
And the other traditions were, Black Church.
The prophetic tradition.
The prophetic tradition. What's that?
Well, this is the what we often talk about the Black church in the United States, you can talk about it in different ways. One would be to look at historically African American denominations,
Yeah.
pretty much all of which form because there was no room for African Americans to participate in white denominations. They were not allowed. They were excluded. So sometimes they form their own denominations. Sometimes there's a sense of a white denomination says, well, you may have your churches here as long as we're over you. The author, Dr. Fields, who you mentioned, his point is the Black church is actually broader than these historical churches, although those historical churches are important, and that all African Americans we should sort of understand as being a part of this larger Black church tradition because of the distinctive historical experiences of African Americans.
Okay.
And this is a group, and one of the things I was asking them to talk about is to what extent is your tradition. Do you see government primarily as something that's positive, that's an agent of positive change,
Right.
that God can work through government? Or do you see government primarily in negative terms, something that restrains evil, or something in between? And Bruce's point in his chapter was, well, for this tradition, it's kind of both. There have been a lot of instances, obviously, for African Americans where government has been the force of evil, and laws themselves have instituted and then perpetuated discrimination and oppression. So in that way,
Right.
you have to see the church as a force for evil. But the same,
state.
government. Whoops,
The state.
let's hope not
Thank
the church.
you.
Although sometimes,
Occasionally.
sometimes these sinful people, you never know.
Different episode.
So the state has sometimes been a force for evil. At the same time, when we look particularly at civil rights movements and others, the state has also been a force for good. And so we can see examples of the state helping move us past patterns of oppression,
Right.
and then trying to eradicate many of those laws. So you have kind of the state stopping what the state had done before.
Right.
Which is complicated.
Which has really framed modern politics, because there are those who are states' rights, anti-federal government, small government advocates, because they see government intervention as ultimately a problem. It takes away individual freedoms. And then there are those who say, no, the federal government's role in the society is to advance those freedoms, to make things
Right.
better. And so they tend to be advocates for a larger or stronger central government. And it goes back to the Civil War. But we still are having that same basic debate.
And really back to even the revolutionary times, right?
Absolutely. The Confederacy versus,
The Loyalists and the Patriots.
Right, and then the Articles of Confederation versus a central constitution that was a
Right.
stronger federal government. But all that to say is we have Christians on all sides of this.
Yes.
Because if you're in a white evangelical tradition, politically there was more alignment with the Republicans and
Right.
states' rights, small federal government. If you are in a black evangelical tradition, there's a higher percentage of people who are voting Democrat who want a stronger
much so.
central government.
Right.
Okay.
So it's
See
not
it as
necessarily
necessary for protection.
right. So it's not a Christian thing. It's more of a political experience and history
Right.
thing.
And there's one other thing I would say too
Sorry,
when we
Phil's trying to
Oh,
get it in.
so when we look at
Yeah.
this, it's also, I think, in some ways, a debate over what's most important, liberty or equality. I mean, both of those are really important goals.
Which one is more important?
It depends on who you ask. I know, you can tell me what you think. But so if you think liberty is most important, typically sort of that smaller government, more conservative ideology is going to say we need individual, and it's often individual freedom because this
Right.
is the US of A and we're about individual rights. Where if you're thinking about equality, how do we treat everyone the same? That's usually going to require, at least the United States, it's really required the central government, the national government to say, we don't trust you states because you haven't treated everyone the
Right.
same. So both of those are important, but they do come into tension. And so a lot of what we end up seeing even on the national scene is really a debate over liberty or equality.
And isn't it easier to advocate for liberty if you already feel like you have equality?
Absolutely.
And if you don't have equality, it's like, well, quit talking about liberty. Let's get equal first.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
and that's
anyway.
part of the problem.
So it's a sort of a privileged conversation to talk about liberty.
I do think it's interesting because until this conversation, I had never heard it articulated that, the different religious traditions may undergird that sort of separation between, church or between Republican and Democrat. Normally you would say that the Democrats are much more socially engaged and, not having anything to do with the religious traditions. So that's super interesting because
Well, yeah,
we've
and-
lost that.
Well, there's a phrase that came out of I think it was 2008. The media, like the God gap.
Oh, yeah.
There's a nice sound to it, and there is a God gap in the sense when you look at presidential voting, you will find that usually about 3/4 of white evangelicals are going to vote Republican.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to see that about 2/3 of seculars, 2/3 to 3/4 of seculars are going to vote Democratic. So a lot of people looked at this, and indeed for many presidential elections, that sort of that idea of how often one attends church, so religious adherence was one of the key indicators of a presidential vote. So that matters. But that's kind of masking I think what's going on. So one of the things that I was trying to do in this book, so I have each of the people from their traditions talk about their traditions. But in the end, I tried to sort of, okay, so how does this work in modern American politics? Because we do think of things sort of in these really broad strokes. Evangelicals, seculars, well, what about those other people? So part of what I'm trying to show, the Black church, for example, the African-American vote is overwhelmingly Democratic, about 90% Democratic in a presidential election. I think part of it comes from the church tradition, but a lot of it also comes from the historical experience of African-Americans. When we look at white evangelicals, we see them firmly in the Republican camp. Again, not all, but something like 75%. But when we look at Catholic voters, for example, Catholic voters are very evenly divided. They're swing voters. When we look at mainline Protestants, they're swing voters. So part of what's going on, if we start unpacking these traditions, is that the different traditions are kind of on different. So liberty on this and equality on this. And I'm conservative here and I'm liberal here. So the Catholic tradition in particular, if you look at the official teachings of the Catholic Church, you're going to see it doesn't align at all with either party. You're going to go here, they're Republican here and Democratic here, back. And so I think it's helpful to just kind of unpack that a little bit and realize that it's not as if, at least I would say, we don't need to take our faith and just automatically say, okay, I'm a Christian, therefore I'm a Republican, or I'm a Christian, therefore I'm a Democrat.
Right.
We need to think through the larger questions about church and state, and then we also need to think through each issue independently.
Well, that sounds like hard work.
Yeah,
it is hard work.
Amy,
Yeah,
that's
it's complicated.
Hard.
Yeah.
You're giving us homework.
I am.
Well, that's not.
Are you saying that a lot of us? Are you saying that a lot of us sort of aren't very thoughtful in terms of how we align ourselves? That maybe we just go along with those that we're around?
There can be some of that. Another thing, and I'm not sure as much that we go along with those around because that they're telling us to do, but there's a lot of research from social science that suggests that we spend time with those who agree with us, and we live near people who share our political views, and almost all of our friends share our political views. And if you look at individual churches, we worship with people who share our political views.
It's scary not to do that.
It's very scary. And so, but what we found is that there's just been more and more of this. There's a guy named Bill Bishop who wrote a book called The Big Sort. And his argument is, as we've become more mobile as a society, as people have choices, not everyone has a choice in where they live, but when they do, if you're more liberal, you immediately think, oh, the Pacific Northwest looks great. If you're more conservative, you say, hey, let's move to the South. If you're kind of in between, you stay right here in the good old Midwest. So we
In Wheaton.
And in Wheaton, maybe not so much.
Well, but we do the same thing online with our
Absolutely.
digital communities. We tend to curate people who think just like we do, and we hear the same opinions and get our news from the channel that corresponds to what we already think, and we live in these echo chambers.
And that's where the homework comes in.
And ironically, at a time when we are more diverse than ever as a country, we are more isolated and like-minded with smaller. It's just bizarre.
So what homework am I going to give you, Sky?
Well, I'm biracial and diverse in my family right now, so I don't have to do anything.
Yeah,
You do. What's your homework? What's your homework, Phil?
My homework, I have to go meet, I don't know.
Well,
He initiated a conversation, I don't know if you know this, with an atheist.
Excellent.
Over the last
More than
couple of years.
one, thank you very
with more
much.
than one. And honestly, I have to say, that was really transformative in my thinking to watch Phil reach out like that and begin this conversation with somebody that he doesn't hold the same views with at all in a civil way. And a lot of our listeners have said that. And I think that should be all of our homework.
We have a pretty good diversity of listeners, too. Our Facebook page gets very interesting. Almost never unkind, but there's quite a bit of varied viewpoints.
And
My
that's
first homework
great.
is to read your book.
Okay, well that will help you. But the other thing, your other homework is to sort of look and say, what are my main sources of news, and what are those online communities that I'm a part of? which is all good and wonderful. But then, so if I spend all my time at Fox News, maybe I should go check out MSNBC for a little bit. If I'm only at MSNBC, maybe I should add in a little Fox News, so that we're beginning to have, even if it's, I'm not saying that if you're liberal you need to become conservative, or that you're conservative you need to become liberal. What I'm saying is, if all of your friends and all of the political messages that you're receiving are talking about a single party or a single candidate, you need to seek out conversations with people who have other views, not to change your mind, but to understand them and for them to understand you. It can be a two-way conversation.
A well-known evangelical leader recently wrote in a blog post that Hillary Clinton is wrong on 100% of the issues. And that raised some eyebrows as to, okay, really? 100%.
It's kind of impressive.
That seems extreme. But especially the fact that 90% of black Protestants are currently supporting Hillary Clinton.
Right.
Do they know that she's wrong?
Actually, those numbers may be higher.
Maybe, well, definitely higher in Ohio.
Well,
it's 100%.
Isn't that really just whoever this person was? Isn't it really just his or her way of saying, no matter what Hillary says, I'm going to disagree with her? Period.
Most likely.
No matter what it is, she could say Jesus Christ is Lord, and he would say, "Yeah, I don't think." And she would. She's a Methodist.
So you don't mean that. You mean this.
Right.
This is what you mean. It means you want to take my gun away or something.
Who knows
have to
what?
come up with something.
And there are others who feel that way about Trump, that he's 100% wrong about everything. And
right. He comes closer, though.
I don't think there's ever going to be a candidate. I like to tell my students. I like to tell my students, if I ran for office, I wouldn't agree with myself on absolutely everything. I think because,
that's concerning.
Well, actually, I think it makes sense.
Okay.
Issues are complicated.
And people change their minds.
People change their, genuinely change their minds.
What we really want to talk about is, you're an expert on politics. So you're watching this cycle, this presidential campaign, this season. What are you thinking? What is it? Because this is, it's like me watching a Pixar film. I have different thoughts than my mom watching a Pixar film.
Right.
So you watching this election cycle, what are you learning? What conclusions are you coming to? Give us a few.
Okay. Well, I'll start with my first answer. Is it over yet?
We're all saying that.
I think
That's
we're all
nothing
saying
new.
that. I mean, this is by far the most complicated, most vexing election that I can ever remember. And I'm getting older, so there's quite a few presidential elections that I have remembered. And so I don't think I'm alone. And then when we look at the polling data, what's so different and I think disturbing about the election is how much negativity there is. So these two candidates are the two most unpopular candidates since we have been measuring popularity of presidential candidates.
How does that happen? How do you go through a primary process and end up with the most unpopular candidates?
Don't you think it would kind of be the opposite?
Doesn't it seem like that's not democracy?
You should be getting the most popular
You think you
candidates.
would, but I guess that's where you have to start sort of unpeeling the layers. And so how did we get there? We got there through a primary system.
Yeah.
So we could go back in history and talk about different ways of nominating presidents, but the bottom line is our current process, we nominate presidents through primaries and caucuses that people have to show up. And I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I'm going to be close. I believe it was either 16 or 17% turnout in Republican primaries and caucuses and something like 13% in Democratic. I'm off by maybe 1 point.
Okay, but wait a minute.
That's kind of sad.
Is that because the later
of our voters total.
Right, but is that because later primaries it didn't matter anymore and people just decide not to vote?
But this year actually had higher turnout than many years because a lot of times it's decided so early that the primaries are meaningless. But that's the total voting population. But what happens is you split it up. Now in some states, if they have closed primaries, the only people who can participate would be registered Democrats or registered Republicans. So anyone who's an independent, which is often about a third of voters, are automatically off.
Okay.
And then other states have open primaries, but typically you're going to find that people who are more active in party politics are more likely to participate in primaries. It takes time and effort to get out to vote in a primary. You got to remember it. We have much higher voter turnout during the general election than primaries. So a small group of people.
Is 16 or 17% normal? Is that
That's
pretty
higher.
on par?
It's higher than
normal.
a little bit higher than again. We're talking about the total voting population.
Right.
But so we got a smaller number of people, but then you have to think about who takes the time, the extra time and effort to get involved in a primary. The people that are these the people who are the most interested or the least, right? It's the people who are most interested, and what we find is that the people who are most interested are often also the most agitated. They have the biggest grievances.
These are the same people who write comments on the internet.
Exactly. So if you think everything's kind of okay,
They are.
and you don't write your comment, right?
Yeah.
But if you're really activated, if you're really aggravated, if you're really excited about something, that's when you get involved. So we're not seeing sort of the average Joe and Josephine, if you will. We're getting the most activated voters. So what happens in the Republican primary? You get the most conservative voters typically. And the Democratic primary, you get the most liberal voters. Those are typically the ones who show up. And so you're not getting the average voter. You're getting the most upset.
Why then in previous cycles have we not seen the most disliked or divisive candidates get the nominations?
Because it's something new we're trying.
But we've had the same system since the 1960s. The late 60s anyway, the primary system.
It sort of it started in the 60s, but really by the early 70s, it's pretty much in place.
2008, 2004, 2000, we didn't get the most dreaded candidates each time.
But
actually, if you think back to Bill Clinton and to George Bush, each side would say their unfavorables, I think, were pretty high.
from the other side.
Not as
Maybe
high.
Not
But not within
nothing
their
as
own
high.
party.
But when you look at, we look at previous elections. You saw that, for example, in 2012, we saw conservatives wanting something like, so Rick Santorum does well for a while, Newt Gingrich does well for a while, and
Herman
then-
Cain.
for a while.
I wanted
was
the
fun.
pizza guy. Come
That
on.
was fun.
And
Just
then
for the humor.
things kind of settle down, and it sort of moves more to the middle of the party. What
Right.
happened this year is that we didn't ever quite move to, particularly on the Republican side. 17 candidates is more than any I think we can ever handle in a primary system.
So-
and so we got the reality show guy.
So is it just that Donald Trump was kind of a black sheep candidate? I mean, a black swan candidate, not a black sheep, orange sheep.
He was every sheep.
The black swan scenario where there's just no parallel to him in recent political history, so we don't know how to.
I think
how
that's
to
part
factor
of it.
this in.
He also he taps into something. He taps into voter concern, voter anger, frustration that's been building, and so he's put together a really odd coalition. He's pulling people who haven't, and he'll tell you that too. All these people have come out to vote for me that haven't participated before, because they're people who were outside of politics and so estranged from politics. They wanted to have nothing to do with it. So some, I think, are coming to Trump because of that. We see that in some of the polling data. But I think Trump also really benefited, and we talk about him as sort of his reality shows, but he was a household name.
Right.
I guess the only other person you could say that was close to a household name would have been Jeb Bush because of the family, but his
the
first
Bush
name
part
wouldn't
more
be
than
the
the Jeb
household.
part.
Exactly.
Right.
So if you're not a household name and you've got a list of 17, it kind of makes sense that the person you've heard of might do a little bit better.
Right. That Kim Kardashian might have also won the Republican primary.
Possibly. But there's more there. It's not just obviously that name recognition, but when we talk about campaigns, this thing we call name ID is so important. You spend all this money early to get your name out there so someone knows who you are.
Was Hillary Clinton really just
It's a different story in
the
that side.
next one in line? Like there was no major opposition to her because she had earned the right to.
Well, I'm not sure if that's maybe part of it, but what was going on there? I would say she was the heir apparent.
Yeah.
So there's a sense of everyone knew she
But
was
who
running.
decided that?
The party. Usually it's like the RNC or the DNC.
And we
They
do
kind of
see
all
some
get
of
together
that
and they
from
say
the party.
who is our most viable.
It's also the donors, and it's
And the
who is
donors.
giving money, and it is hard to underestimate the importance and the power of Bill and Hillary Clinton within the Democratic Party. Bill Clinton has just been such the standard bearer for the party ever since really he left office, and so he has raised millions of dollars for other Democratic candidates.
Yeah.
He is well known. He's going around the country giving speeches. They've set up this foundation. So a lot of people are saying, well, if Hillary Clinton runs, I'm assuming that I'm not going to be able to get the same donations, and I don't want I don't want to mess with that.
Yeah.
So a lot
No
of
one
people
wants to
were
get on the
waiting.
bad side of the Clintons or
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So there's a real reason there to hesitate. So we didn't have the same number of people lining up on the Democratic side. Where given Secretary Clinton's negatives, we had 17 people lining up on the Republican side because they said, you know what, this is one we maybe can win.
Right.
Yeah, she's vulnerable.
She's
Right.
vulnerable. So it's this really odd. And then, of course, we saw even in the Democratic primary, I mean, I don't think anyone could have predicted that Bernie Sanders, who joins the Democratic Party because he used to be the only socialist in Congress, changes his party to Democrat to run for president, and then after he lost the bid, changes his party back to socialist. So you would never expect that someone with that kind of credential would do so
a
well.
part-time Democrat running against a part-time Republican.
Exactly.
So, should we be looking at this cycle as an anomaly? Like, this is just a weird election, and it's bizarre, and it'll be over in the next couple months, and we can all kind of go back? Or does this represent a bigger trend? Is this a change? Not that Trump is going to be around forever, but will we see these kinds of really nasty, negative things going forward? Is this the new normal?
That's a great question, which means I really don't know. I mean, no one predicted this election, and I think it would be presumptuous of me to say I know for sure what's going on. I would say this election has a lot of trends that we've been seeing kind of building for years have just erupted in this election.
A tipping point.
So maybe we've reached a tipping point. So does that mean we've reached a tipping point and there's a point of no return? Or does it mean we've gone so far that voters say, wait a minute, let's back
Right.
up and try again? And I don't know if we're going to hit the reset button or if this is what we're in for. But one thing I have said, at least in my home, I don't know if I've said publicly, but I do think we're getting the candidates that we deserve.
Ooh.
And I don't say that because I think these are positive candidates to affirm with great joy. It's that we've had such a negative, bitter, it's this negativity, this bitterness, this hyper sort of almost anti-partisanship, that what we've seen building, it's not just that people are, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat. It's, I'm a Republican because I hate the Democrats. And I'm a Democrat because I hate the Republicans. And I'm using the word hate intentionally because there's this real sense of just bitterness against the other party. And so many people, their politics is much less about what I'm for than what I'm against.
Right.
And I think we're seeing that with the candidates that we've ended up with.
Okay, so there's been a lot of talk for conservative Christians trying to figure out, okay, which is the lesser of the two evils?
Right.
We've decided that both candidates are undesirable, and we're trying to figure out which one to hold. If we have to hold our nose and vote, which one should we vote for? You said you actually had a point of view about
Right.
voting for the lesser of two evils.
I do indeed.
What's your perspective on that?
Well, part of it may just be it's the turn of phrase. So
Yeah.
if we're just saying that because it sounds cute, that's one thing. But if you genuinely believe, first of all, it's the lesser of two evils. If you genuinely believe, my choice is I cannot vote for these because these are evil. I heard someone say it's a bit extreme, but it makes the point. If you've got Stalin versus Hitler, do you choose one? So I'm not claiming an equivalence at all in this election. But I think it's really important that before God, when we vote, that we can cast what I call an affirmative ballot. So when I go to vote, and I think it's important to vote, I understand Christian traditions that choose not to do that. I see that as a legitimate Christian option, but I come from a tradition, and I do believe that government is a potential source of restoration, and I see that God can be doing redemptive work through government. So I think it's important living in a Republican democracy to vote. So when I go to vote, I look at the candidates, and of course, there's so many on the ballot, it can get a little overwhelming. But I try to say, and I've had many times, I live in Illinois, I have many times when I have not voted for governor. I have had reasons where I look at both candidates and I say, I cannot affirm a vote for this person. And so then I just go in, there's the governor's race, and I just move down and I look at the other races in the ballot. I would say the same thing for this year.
I heard just yesterday on one of the political talk shows, Jill Stein was being interviewed. She's the Green Party candidate for president, not very well known, but she said something that caught my attention, and I thought she's right, which is candidates are not entitled to our vote. She said they have to earn our vote.
Right.
And if a candidate or all the candidates don't earn your vote, don't just give it away. And that's exactly how I've been feeling in this election, because I've been debating I haven't really been debating I'm not voting for Trump, and I've been debating, can I in any way justify voting for Clinton? And increasingly, as I study what she's saying and positions that she's taking, I'm going, I can't do this. And then I feel like, well, am I just letting Trump win if I don't vote for Clinton, or vice versa? But I've come increasingly to the point of, no, they don't. If they haven't earned my vote, I'm not going to give it to them. Why do I have to give it to them?
And I think that's important. And a couple things. One is, first of all, say, I think we should try to cast that affirmative balance. Say, here is someone that I can support. He or she has earned my support. I'm not saying this person is perfect.
Right.
Every candidate is flawed.
Absolutely.
They're all sinful, broken people, just like each of us here.
Right,
And so I think there's also a danger of expecting too much from a candidate. So I don't think that we have to say, we don't agree on a couple issues and I'm done. I think it's important, though. Some people are single issue voters, and if that's the rubric you want to use, I think it's fine. It doesn't work very well because a lot of times but I think it's really good to have a list of what I call priority issues, and to say, as you read about and learn about, and again from multiple sources, read and learn about the different issues in a campaign. If you have a sense of, before God, I will support a candidate. I can only support a candidate who is this way on issues of war, this way on the abortion issue, this way on death penalty, whatever your issues are. And if you say, I cannot vote for someone who disagrees with me on that issue, if someone disagrees with you in that issue, you skip that particular. But again, I'm not saying don't vote. I'm saying, if you cannot, before God, say, I can affirm enough of what this person stands for that I'm willing to cast my ballot.
So it's a matter of conscience.
Great. It's a matter of conscience, yes.
Can I just play devil's advocate for
Of
1
course.
second?
Uh-oh.
So I'm in the same quandary that Sky is in, except I think I feel so much more strongly about how horrible Trump would be for the presidency in so many different ways. And I feel like it would be very bad and detrimental in a lot of ways, that I feel like I need to do something to help make sure that doesn't happen. And the only way that would be possible would be helping Hillary Clinton win.
If you look at Hillary Clinton's candidacy and you look at what she stands for and you say,
But I
can
don't.
help that win.
But I don't. So that's the problem. That's the problem. I don't necessarily, I'm with Sky on that. It's just that I feel like Trump would be so horrible that I think I need to stop him. I need to do anything I can.
Well, this is where you can look at the math. And one vote isn't really going to make a difference, particularly if you're voting in Illinois.
That's what I was going to say. We live in Illinois, so none of us are going to make a swing
if you live in
here.
New Mexico, it might be decided by 500 votes. But
Right.
But that one individual vote may or may not make the difference. I just don't think that the strategic voting, I guess it's perfectly fine if you want to be strategic about your voting. But it seems to me that ultimately really has to come down to, I want to be able to say, I voted for this person and not look back and regret it. And not look back and say, wow, I cannot believe before God that I supported that, because I don't want my name behind that. So that's what I mean by the casting an affirmative ballot. It's hard.
I'm just going to write in my husband. I believe in him.
And there you go. That would be an affirmative ballot.
He'd be a great president.
Should we have a system like in some countries where the votes are weighted, where you rank the candidates on your preference, and then they have some system
That happens?
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
it does. It does.
It's not in the
It's
US.
not going to happen in the United States, but it does.
Is it remotely possible that we could change anything significant about our current political system, from primaries to gerrymandering? There's a bill in Illinois to try to stop gerrymandering.
And some states have stopped. California
Really?
put a
They
bill
stopped
through
gerrymandering?
that stopped partisan gerrymandering. Iowa has not done it for years. So there are ways that there's some reforms. I don't think we're going to see something like proportional voting or this. There's a fancy name for the weighted voting that I don't
know what that
remember,
is.
because that's what my international relations colleagues teach. And there we also could have where voting was required. I was in Australia this summer, and you have to vote. If you don't vote, you are fined.
They should do that here.
No,
And there's
I don't
a
know if they
monetary
should.
fine. So there's lots of different ways.
I think it's sad that people are not involved.
Have you met a lot of the people around us in our country? Do you
Stop,
really know?
Sky.
I'm
People,
just
if
saying.
people had to vote, don't you think they would pay more attention?
No,
not necessarily.
I don't.
My N of one, the person who had just voted in the Australian election, was talking about how they have a system kind of like that for and he was talking about how complicated it was. And so he'd gone to vote so he didn't have to pay his fine.
So you think that's bad?
I don't think we should force people to vote. I think we
What
should
about all those
encourage
wonderful-
people to vote and do everything we can to break
You
down
can make them
barriers to
vote,
voting.
but you can't make them learn about
True.
the issues.
Yeah.
And that's the danger. So you just get people just checking random boxes or doing a popularity contest. Oh, I saw that one on the Johnny Carson show. He was funny.
You know what you get when everyone
1988.
votes is you get the UK Science Society having a boat named Bodie McBoatface. That's what you get. But it also would be a violation of those Anabaptists who don't want to participate in a system that they think is inherently
Yeah,
Leave
that
it to
would be
the
bad.
Anabaptists to ruin our new plan. Thanks, Anabaptists. Okay, so just, as we're going, so then you're saying we should vote for who?
Well, you should vote for maybe Phil Vischer.
Oh, Phil Vischer for president. How about
Interesting.
Plinky Pete for vice president?
Blinky Pete, I'm running on a platform
That would be
with a
your worst
ukulele.
nightmare.
But one thing I would say, in
Every
addition
State
to
of the
voting for
Union
Phil,
address.
is that we also have to remember if you
Yeah.
are concerned about an election, the presidential or any other, there are all of these other races on the ballot.
Right.
And one thing I worry is that a lot of people
Yeah.
are so turned off by this election that they're just not going to vote. And choosing not to vote for one particular, if you do make that choice, there's still the U.S. Senate, there's still the U.S. House, there's
Right.
all of these local elections. In some states, there's
Right.
gubernatorial races. It's not like we should just say, oh, I'm just opting out. It's that maybe one election here or there, or we get down to the judicial candidates and we don't know enough about them, and so we choose not to
Right.
vote there. But
I have
that's
one.
not the
I
whole
have
thing.
one last question.
Uh-oh.
I have one last question. It seems to me that we've achieved a balance of power in Washington that means we can do nothing for a long, long, long time. Would it be better if we just said, okay, the Democrats won the White House, they get both sides of Congress too, and let's just see what they want to do. And then the next time you say, we don't like that. Now let's just let the Republicans do everything they want to do.
That's
Would it
called
be-
a parliamentary system.
Oh,
Yeah, they have that lots of other places.
and you
that's,
get stuff done.
you get stuff done, but what you do is you get a big shift.
Yeah.
And then people get frustrated and they get another shift. And so
Whoa! It's like a roller coaster
It's
ride.
a roller coaster. It's a rocking boat. And our system is slow and it
Does
is
slow and steady win the race,
inefficient.
or does it just let all your bridges collapse?
I think inefficiency actually serves us well in the United States. It's not perfect, but we don't usually
boy.
have that crazy of
Yeah,
change. Things
yeah.
don't change fast here. That's what our founders wanted, and they got what they wanted. It's probably a lot slower. I know it's a lot slower than I would probably like.
Yeah.
But I'd rather us be slow to change than so rapid to change that
Yeah.
we really don't know what's going on.
Well, we also have a system where there's, as we began with, there's a federal government, there's a state government, there's local government, so more rapid change is possible on a local level.
And we see that.
And
And
you
a
see
lot of
that.
innovation comes from the states.
Right. If there was rapid change all the time on the federal level, it would create a lot of chaos. But it also means that when there is systemic injustice at the federal level, it's a whole lot harder to
Right.
change
Right,
that.
right. Well, that's why my local neighborhood association is implementing single-payer health care for our street, because you can make things happen at the local level. Let me try to summarize it. Well, it's great to talk to Amy Black. It took 3 whole years, but we got her back, and we need to decide whether to jump in the boat with a guy named Trump and see if it'll float, or a lady named Hillary. I don't know if there's a corollary to have 2 candidates that we dislike so much. We gotta have somebody in the White House, even if it's a crutch, just to get through until we can have Amy Black create a parliamentary system. All right, we'll see you next week. Thanks for coming. Go to the Patreon page. Support us if you can. Check out Amy Black's books, The Church and Politics, and Honoring God in Red or Blue. And we will see you next week. Thanks,
Bye,
Amy.
everybody.
See you guys.
Bye.
The Phil Vischer Podcast is produced by Phil Vischer Enterprises and recorded live at Jellyfish Lab Studios. This episode was edited by Jason Rugg and was fact-checked by absolutely no one. For more information, go to philvischer.com.